I don't say this lightly, but I say it sincerely. I count it an honor to be a part of the missionary outreach of Lighthouse Baptist Church. God has done and is doing unusual things. As I watch those flags come to the front and knowing that that represents you on those mission fields, vicariously you are serving through those missionaries who represent, first of all, their Lord, and then they represent you. I don't know what your pastor is going to say about faith promise, but that chapter in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 where it says they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us. Paul was the spokesman for all of us missionaries. Not only have you as a church given yourselves to the Lord, you've given yourselves to us. And we do appreciate that. Brother, I really do appreciate the emphasis upon missions from the beginning of this church. It is so important. It is so exciting to know what God is doing. As we were singing one of my favorite songs here tonight, Lord, send me anywhere. I was praying, Lord, help that not just to be the words of a song to everybody that's singing that right now. Only go with me. And He's already promised He'll go with you. You don't need to worry about that part. I am with you always. Lay any burden on me. You know, that's not easy to pray. But as long as He's doing the laying, any burden can be sustained because He will sustain us. Sever any tie. And in my life I know that that can be the most difficult thing. Sever any tie, save the tie that binds me to thy heart. This kind of commitment. When I was in high school, I want you to turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 16. When I was in high school, I had just been forced to leave the Christian high school that someone else was paying for me to attend in Beckley, West Virginia. And my stepdad just decided one weekend that I wasn't going back, and he had me in the public school on Monday morning after not knowing on Friday that I was not going to get to go back to the Christian high school. I was in public school on Monday morning. My heart was broken. I didn't like being in a public school, and I'm not preaching against public schools. I just didn't enjoy being there. Yet God blessed in the I won't even tell the story, but in the 2 years we were there, God sent revival in our school of about 750 students, and over 300 trusted Jesus Christ as personal Savior. We had a banquet on prom night. Now, I know most churches now say it's okay for the kids to go to the prom, but we had as kids, we decided, and even people in our own home church were saying, you can't do that. You can't do that on the prom night. You have to have it a different night. But we had a banquet on prom night. And we had more at the banquet than they had at the prom. Now, we had to go to the office because there was much opposition, and we were told we could not do it. But, I think that's one of the things that God used to prepare me for the mission field. I don't take no as an answer very easily. we can't do. Why can't we do it? I did that in Japan. When a principal would send the message that we couldn't pass out tracts out in public land to the kids going in and out of the school, I would go in and say, why can't we pass them out? The Constitution says we can. Your Japanese Constitution says we have freedom to do that. Why can't we do that? But I was polite and persistent, and they would most of the time give permission for us to do that. They'd come up with, they're scattered all over the school property. I said, well, you ought to teach your kids not to throw things on the school property. And then I said, besides, we will come in and pick up every piece of paper, not just our tracts and pamphlets. We'll pick up every piece of paper on this property if you'll let us come in. And most of the time they did, just being persistent. But in 1 Thessalonians, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I must stop and be grateful to so many of you who've done so much. I don't like to name names. The Hoffmans have been such marvelous hosts for me to stay in. I got it wrong, didn't I? That's right, that's correct. The Hoffmans. I thought so because I had a coach named Coach Hoffman. But they have been so gracious. They know how to be good hosts without over-entertaining you when you're traveling all the time and everything. And when I say, tell them what I want to eat, that's exactly what they give me. I mean, down to the fresh fruit and different things that I get. And I have really enjoyed being in their home. And I pray that God will use their family, those fine young people, wherever He wants to use them, and that they will be submissive to the Lord. I appreciate all of the ladies and the men who have helped to prepare meals for us every day. And I know that there's a lot of love as well as a lot of work that goes into that, and I appreciate it. I appreciate every person who's come to me knowing that I don't deserve any of it. But saying so many kind things that I could not possibly do all of that. But as the keynote speaker, I would speak for all of the missionaries that this is probably at least one of the best of three churches that support us as missionaries because of your prayer concerns and the contacts that you keep with us. And it does not go unnoticed, and it does not go unappreciated. 1 Thessalonians. What? 1 Thessalonians, did I say 2 Thessalonians the first time? What? Well, Matthew 16 is coming, okay? Just wait. Just put your finger there. Now, Pastor, you've been a bad teacher. You got the whole congregation picking on me now. I wanted to read one verse before we go to Matthew 16, okay? One verse. Will you let me do that? If you'll let me do that, would you lift your hand? Can I read one verse from 1 Thessalonians? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Pastor was the last one to raise his hand, but I'm going to read it anyway. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 24, a very short verse, but one that means so much to me. Faithful is He that calleth you, who also will do it. What have I done over these now 47 years? Since being accepted as a missionary, this coming November will be 50 years since I was accepted with BIMI. Well, what have I done over all those years? Nothing. Nothing. But God has done so much. Far, far above anything that I ever thought about. So much. I arrived in Japan on January the 5th. Excuse me. It's so vivid in my mind. Arriving there January the 5th, cold, bitter, 1965. I turned 22 on December the 4th, 1964. I was 22 years old when I got to Japan. Knew nothing. God, in His graciousness, a month later sent a man named Don Sisk, who was 10 years older than me, who became a great mentor in my life. And I've always been grateful for that man and his friendship and what he did for me. But everything that's happened in my life, every heartache, every disturbance, that high school experience, I didn't want to leave the Christian high school. And I don't think that I personally still don't think that my stepdad did the right thing when he took me out, and yet God did some amazing things. When God called me to be a missionary, I began to pray about it. Just before graduation, about 6 months before graduation, I was granted a scholarship from West Virginia University. The scholarship was fully paid, with the stipulation that I had to teach school after I graduated in the state of West Virginia for 5 years. My parents, my stepdad and my mother, were very excited that that had happened. But I knew I couldn't take that scholarship. And when I told them I couldn't, because God had called me to be a missionary and I had to go to Bible college to train, my stepdad became very angry, and he said, "You have till graduation from high school to change your mind. If you don't, you will not live under my roof and not do what I say." I caught the Greyhound bus the day after my graduation to summer school at Tennessee Temple. The first Christmas, I called and I said, "Is it okay if I come home for Christmas?" And my mother said yes, and my stepdad heard her and said, "Has he changed his mind?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And she said, "Well, he said don't come." He took the phone and said, "Do not come back home." So I stayed on campus. There were about 5 of us that stayed on campus for that first Christmas. But I don't say that to get you to feel sorry for me. I say that to say that God will take care of every need that we have. I got to Japan, knew nothing. 3 weeks after we got there, I've already told you, we started the first church, Dave Markham and I. About 10 months later, Don Sisk and I went with him to start a new church in the city of Osaka. Then my wife and I went to start a church in the city of Kobe. Long story that led us there, definitely led of the Lord. We prepared at least 30,000 brochures advertising the opening meeting. For every church that I've been involved in helping to start, we always start with an opening meeting, Friday night, Saturday night, and then Sunday. And then on Sunday, that Sunday becomes every Sunday, and we don't let down. Friday and Saturday we start for them. The main reason is because there's help from other churches, because they're not in their church on those days. The first night, except for the group that came from the other 2 churches that we'd had a part in helping to start, nobody came. My heart was broken. But I went home that night and worked all night making more pamphlets. If it doesn't work, just work harder. Just work harder. And so I went out that Saturday, left the house at 4 o'clock in the morning, went back out and started at the train station, and then went door to door all day long until time for the evening meeting. At the beginning of that evening meeting, there were other Christians there to do the music and everything, but a man came in, highly inebriated. Is that a good word? He was dog drunk, is what he was. And he came into the meeting, but I was glad to see him. I was so excited. And then a grandmother came in with a little boy, grandson, I'm sure. Meanest little kid I've ever seen. He even came up and beat on the piano while we were trying to have the service. I was afraid to say anything. I was afraid they'd leave. And I was so excited. You say, well, that's just 2 people and a little child. But I was excited. I was excited. But when I stood up to preach, they all left. And there I stood, thinking, Lord, I can't preach. I can't do this. But the Lord enabled me to get through a sermon. And then I went home that night. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, in agony, I cried out and I said, Lord, why can't I build a church? You see, the devil was saying, Don Sis can build a church, but you can't. Dave Markham can build a church, but you can't. And I said, Lord, why? Why can't I build a church? And he said, because you're not supposed to. I will build my church. I will build my church. You are here to serve me. You see, wherever you go, missionaries, future missionaries, wherever you go, always remember that it's not the ministry that you serve. Pastor, remember, it's not the ministry, it's the master that you serve. And it's his ministry. And it's his church. And unless he builds the church, it will not be the church that will glorify him. So that night, I committed my life to serve him without regard to results or comparisons with other missionaries. That I would serve him where he wanted me to serve him. The next morning, I went there. No people from the other churches. 9 people came. And 7 of them trusted Christ as Savior. You see, God had, not only did he speak to my heart in the night, but he gave me some tangible evidence that he would keep his word to me. So this passage of Scripture has meant a lot to me. And as you are in building program, of course, we all know that church is not facility. God gives the facility in order for the church to function doing what the church is supposed to be doing. And we need to be careful. But this question, in verse 13, it says, when Jesus came into the coasts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, whom do men say that I am? Now, I don't think Jesus was really all that interested in who everybody else thought he was. That's what we call in literature a leading question. He was asking the first question so that he could get to the question he was really wanting to ask those disciples. And they gave him various answers, named the prophets, different ones, different. If we went out on the streets today and asked people, who do you think Jesus is? We would get a variety of answers as well. But you see, folks, that's not really the issue. After that, he said, but whom say ye that I am? The question at the banquet, that final question kind of hit us missionaries. How was the question? Who is Jesus to you? Who is Jesus Christ to you? I would ask you the same question. As members of Lighthouse Baptist Church or as people who are visiting in this service, I would ask you that, who would you say that Jesus is? You see, if we are going to do anything to succeed for his glory here or on the mission fields of the world, we must, first of all, recognize the person of Jesus Christ, who he is. You see, before Jesus moved on in what he's going to say in the rest of this chapter, he said, who do you say that I am? And Peter, as spokesman, rarely but accurately got it right. And he said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Most of the religions of the world are really centered, and especially Buddhism and Shintoism and some of them, are centered around death, not life. Everything they do is in preparation for this spirit world, or praying for their ancestors or something else. But we serve a living Savior. He is the Christ. He is the Son of the living God, the one who has always lived, the one who will always in the future still be alive. We serve Him. Whether it be here at Lighthouse Baptist Church or in the nation of Japan or in Iraq or wherever it might be, we must remember, unless we know who He is, I mean know in an experiential way. And if we know who He is, we can trust Him no matter what He does. But we have to know who He is. And Jesus said, when Peter said this, Jesus said to him, "You're blessed. Flesh and blood has not revealed it to you, but my Father which is in heaven." And then He said, "I say, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Now there's a large denomination that's called Christian that says that Peter was that rock, but he was not. Christ is the rock. You could do a study through the whole Bible about Christ and the relation to the rock. Christ was that rock, it says in Corinthians. This statement of who He is the foundation for everything we must do. You see, not only must we recognize the person of Jesus Christ, but we must rely upon the promise of Jesus Christ. I will build my church. I believe, and I can say this as I observe and have observed even this week, that He is at work building His church right here. He is at work building this church. And we need to be careful that we recognize and rely upon His promise. I've seen it happen over and over. I've been in all kinds. Japan is one of the most difficult places in the world. And I even had missionaries tell me, don't expect to be able to start a church here, not a very big one. You know, the Japanese have totally rejected the gospel. I said, well, why are we here? He said, we're here to be prophets of doom, so that when they stand before God in the judgment, they'll be without excuse. I said, well, I don't think I want to be that. But God bless. But I've seen it. You preach the gospel, and one or two or three will believe. And right in the middle of the devil's darkest place, and his firmest strongholds, this little church starts to spring up. And nothing the devil and all of his demons can do can stop it. I've seen, personally having some contact with 97 plus churches in Japan, none of them closed their doors. They're still going for the glory of God. Not all of them are large churches, but all of them are His churches, and He is building His church in Japan. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. Verse 19 then, it says, I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. What does this verse mean? I've heard messages in the hills of West Virginia from this verse that have some of the strangest teaching you could ever think about in your life. So I think it's best if we just let the Word of God answer the question. I will give to you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. What are they? What are the keys? Verse 20 says, He charged His disciples that they should tell no man that He was Jesus the Christ. Pastor Whitmer, I've never seen that on a missionary conference banner. Don't tell anybody. Yet, I've got to make the keys. I've got to make the keys, or else there's no message to tell. Verse 21, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. The gospel keys. The gospel keys. You see, the gospel is the power of God unto salvation to everybody that believes. Without the gospel, we have no message to tell. So we can talk about who he is, but we also have to be ready with what he has prepared for us to use. And the gospel message must go out. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to lost and dying souls. We must be ready with what he has provided. No other message will work. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you can just be a great example as a missionary on a mission field, because it's a hard mission field and it's a restricted mission field. You know, it's easy to fall into the, well, we'll wait till somebody comes to us and then we'll talk to them about the gospel. No, we have been sent into all the world to preach the gospel. And if we preach the gospel, Christ will allow us to see those keys. If a person, the key is for two reasons. And I've been using the key where I've been staying. And the two reasons, because I can only use the top deadbolt, I have to use the key for two things. What do I have to use it for? To lock the door and to unlock the door. That's what the gospel. If a person refuses the keys of the gospel keys, there is no way he will ever see heaven's gate open for him. But anybody can receive the keys and use them. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Now, one more thing, and this spoke to my heart. Peter took him, verse 22, and began to rebuke him, saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. He had just said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now he's taking him and rebuking him and saying, Lord, this can't be to you. Calling me Lord and then telling him that he can't do something, see. Now, I believe Peter, see, the Lord defined the problem when he said, get thee behind me, Satan. And then he told Peter, you savor the things that are of man. You're thinking like a man. Now, the first thing you said was revealed to you from the Father which is in heaven. Now you're thinking like a man. And if we're not careful as we serve God, we'll start thinking like men. And we'll start thinking about the impossibilities of situations or the difficulties of situations or some of those things. And we will make serious mistakes as we serve God. So we have to be rebuked at his prerogative. If we are going to succeed in serving God, we must be submissive to his correction in our life. Sometimes through others. But we must be. But now very quickly, he turned to Peter and told him, get thee behind me. You're an offense unto me, for you savor not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. Then Jesus turned to all of his disciples, and he said this, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? For what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? See, Jesus was saying to them, I must be lifted up. I must go to my cross. But if you will, you can deny yourself. You can die to yourself. And you can take up your cross and become my disciple. You see, he turns this negative situation into an invitation to follow him. See, if you follow him, you must be willing to lay aside your own ambitions. Deny yourself. Take up your cross, and a cross is not to wear. A cross is not to wear. A cross is not to be an adornment. It's okay if you do that, as long as it reminds you that the purpose for the cross is to die. And you don't. It's not talking about the sufferings of life, where as Jesus bore His cross to Calvary, that you drag your cross around all your life and don't complain about it. That's how most people interpret this, but that's not true. It means you die to everything, your soul, your own desires, your own wishes, your own anything. All you are, all you ever hope to be, needs to be yielded to Him. You see, if we are going to see Him build His church, we're going to have to be willing to be one of the instruments that He uses to do that. And He says, if any, you see, we must respond to this plea of Jesus Christ. I think if He were here today, He would say, I'll build my church, but you need to die to yourself. You need to deny yourself, and you need to follow me. I'm pleading with you, come. For whosoever will save his life will lose it. And whosoever would lose his life for my sake shall find it. You see what he said? The plea is, you see, if missions, they're praying for partners out on their mission field. It's highly possible, but one of those couples could be right here in this auditorium right now. If we're willing to go. If the Lord would make that possible for me, I would be willing to go, would be the first step. That first step of denying what you want, denying yourself, and saying, I will die to all my own desires, and I will give my life to Him for whatever He wants me to do, and I will follow Him. Response to His plea is what I plead with you. And then finally, verse 27 says, the Son of Man shall come in the glory of His Father with His angels, and then He shall reward every man according to his works. Recognize His person. Rely on His promise. Be ready with His provision. Let Him reprimand and rebuke you at His prerogative to keep you on the right track. And then always, always, always respond to His plea. And then one day, you will be rewarded in His presence. Every head bowed, every eye closed.